3. Covering a distance of over 80 kilometers, Ikikuro rushed breathlessly through mountains and fields, and by the afternoon of the following day, he burst into Jogenji Temple, located in Ogaki, Bungo Province. He had not intended to come to this temple from the start. During his flight, when he happened to come across the temple, his disturbed, repentant heart suddenly felt a desire to cling to a religious light. Jogenji was the head temple of the Shinjōan sect in the Bungo region. Ikikuro clung to the sleeve of the great monk Jino Myoan and sincerely confessed his repentance. The venerable monk, true to his nature, did not abandon even this gravely wicked man. When Ikikuro considered turning himself in to the authorities, the monk stopped him and said, "Because you have repeatedly committed evil deeds, it is one path for you to expose yourself to the authorities and face the consequences in this life. However, if you do so, you will have to endure the suffering of the blazing hells for eternity. Instead, it is crucial that you return to the path of Buddhism and, for the sake of saving others, dedicate your life to helping people while also saving yourself." Hearing these words, Ikikuro felt his heart burn with even greater remorse and immediately resolved to become a monk. Under the guidance of the venerable monk, he was ordained and given the name Yabakei. He devoted himself wholeheartedly to the practice of the Buddhist path, and within less than 6 months, his practice was as pure as ice and frost. In the morning, he concentrated on the practices of the 3 mysteries, and in the evening, he never left his seat for the secret practice of Nembutsu. His diligent practice blossomed into wisdom, and he became a monk of remarkable knowledge and enlightenment. Realizing that his spiritual determination was now unshakable, he obtained permission from his teacher to embark on a great vow to save others and set out on a journey as a wandering monk. After leaving the land of Bungo, he first aimed for the capital city of Kyoto. Despite having killed many people, even though he was now a monk, he felt guilty for still being alive. He wished to devote his entire being to helping others in order to atone, even if just a little, for his sins. In particular, he felt an unbearable burden for having tormented travelers in the Kiso Mountains, believing that he could never fully repay his debt to those he had wronged on his journey. At all times and in all places, he had never failed to think of others. When he saw someone in trouble on the road, he would pull them by the hand and push them at the waist to help them along their journey. There were times when he carried the sick and the elderly, not hesitating to travel several ri, a traditional Japanese unit of distance, despite the distance. Even on the village roads away from the main highway, when a bridge was destroyed, he would go into the mountains himself to cut wood and transport stones to make repairs. If he saw a road in disrepair, he would bring soil to mend it. Thus, from the Kanai region through Chugoku, he devoted himself tirelessly to accumulating good deeds. However, reflecting on the sins that weighed upon him, which were higher than the sky, and the good deeds he had accumulated, which seemed lower than the ground, he lamented the depth of his past wrongdoings. Ikikuro knew that the trifling good deeds he performed could not atone for his extreme evil, and his heart grew dark. As he pondered this, he felt deeply frustrated that he was still clinging to life, even while not receiving any reliable rewards for his hardships in the afterlife. At times, he even wished to end his own life. Yet, each time, he summoned his unwavering courage and prayed that the opportunity to carry out the great task of saving others would arise. It was autumn in the 9th year of the Kyoho era. He crossed from Akamagaseki to Kokura, visited the USA Hachiman Shrine in Bizen Province, and planned to ascend the Yamakuni River to visit the Kashyaka-Tsuzan Rakandara. He traveled south from Yokkaichi, passing through the vast fields of red soil, following the road along the valley of the Yamakuni River. Autumn in Chikushi deepened at each lodging along the station route. In the mixed woods, the wild persimmons glowed bright red, the rice fields ripened to a golden yellow, and the eaves of the farmhouses were adorned with the region's specialty, persimmons, hanging like bright red jewels. It was on a day shortly after the beginning of August. As he walked along the clear, flowing waters of the Yamakuni River on his right, He crossed the mountain path from Mikuchi to Hita Station, arriving there around midday. After having a simple lunch at the lonely station, he continued southward along the Yamakuni Valley. Once he left Hita Station, the road again followed the Yamakuni River, running along the volcanic rock banks. As Ikikuro traced the difficult stony path, relying on his walking stick, he suddenly noticed a group of 4 or 5 farmers nearby shouting and cursing. When Ikikuro approached, one of them quickly spotted him and said, "You've come to a good place. A poor soul has met an untimely death. Since you happen to be passing by, please say a prayer for him." Upon hearing of the untimely death, Ikikuro thought it might be the corpse of a traveler killed by bandits, and he recalled his past wrongdoings, feeling a surge of remorse that made his legs tremble. "He looks like a drowned man, but why is his skin torn in places?" Ikikuro asked, trembling with fear. One of the men replied, "You may not know this as a traveler, but if you go up this river for half a town, there's a difficult place called the Chain Crossing. It's the most perilous point in the Yamakuni Valley, where all people and horses traveling north and south face great difficulties." This man was a horseman living in the upper Kakisaka district of the river. This morning, while crossing the Chain Crossing, his horse went mad, and he fell nearly 5 jo, a traditional Japanese unit of length, straight down, meeting the tragic end you see now. When it comes to the Chain Crossing, I have often heard it is a treacherous place, but do such tragedies happen frequently? Ikikuro asked, watching over the corpse with concern. 3 or 4 people a year, and sometimes as many as 10, unexpectedly meet their unfortunate ends there. Because it is an unparalleled danger spot, even if the bridge is damaged by wind and rain, we cannot repair it as we wish, one of the farmers replied as they began to deal with the corpse. Ikikuro recited a sutra for the unfortunate victim and quickened his pace toward the Chain Crossing. It was less than a town away. Looking ahead, he saw a rugged mountain towering on the left side of the river, with sheer cliffs rising nearly 10 jo, a traditional Japanese unit of length, that exposed its grayish-white, jagged skin. The waters of the Yamakuni River seemed to be drawn toward this cliff, swirling and washing against its base while reflecting a deep green hue. Ikikuro thought that this must be the chain crossing the villagers had mentioned. The path was cut off by the cliff, and a precarious bridge made of logs of pine and cedar chained together was perilously strung across its midsection. Even for someone not faint of heart, looking down at the water's surface, which was more than 5 jo below, and up at the nearly 10 jo high cliff above would naturally fill anyone with fear and dread. As Ikikuro clung to the rock face, his trembling feet finally found their footing, and just as he turned to look back at the cliff, a great vow suddenly sprouted in his heart. Realizing that the atonement he needed to accumulate was far too small, he prayed for an opportunity to test his determination and courage in the face of hardship. Witnessing the travelers struggling before him and seeing a place that claimed nearly 10 lives each year, the thought of sacrificing his own life to remove this danger surged forth within him. An audacious vow emerged in his heart, to carve a path through the 200-odd yards of sheer cliff. Ikikuro felt that what he had been seeking had finally been found here. If he could save 10 people in a year, then in 10 years he could save 100, and in 100 years or 1,000 years, he believed he could save millions of lives. With this resolution, he dedicated himself to action. From that day forward, while staying at the lodging of Rakandara, he traveled to the villages along the Yamakuni River, urging them to support the great endeavor of tunnel excavation. However, no one listened to the words of this wandering monk. A madman trying to carve through a massive boulder that exceeds 3 towns. Ha ha ha. Those who laughed were at least tolerable. What a great deception. To speak as if a needle could peek at the heavens and then try to collect money, that's a grand swindle. Among them were some who even persecuted Ikikuro for his persuasion. For 10 days, Ikikuro exerted himself in vain to solicit donations, but when he realized that no one was willing to listen, he resolutely decided to take on this great endeavor by himself. He obtained a hammer and chisel from a stone mason and stood at one end of the sheer cliff. It was an enormous caricature. Although it was composed of easily carved volcanic rock, Ikikuro intended to carve through the massive, towering cliff that loomed over the river with his own strength. He's completely lost his mind. The passers-by laughed, pointing at Ikikuro. Yet, Ikikuro did not yield. Bathing in the clear waters of the Yamakuni River, he prayed to Kannon, the bodhisattva of compassion, and with all his strength, he struck the first blow with the hammer. In response, only 2 or 3 small fragments flew off. Undeterred, he gathered his strength and brought down the second blow. Again, only 2 or 3 small pieces broke away from the immense mass. With the third, fourth, and fifth strikes, Ikikuro labored desperately. Whenever he felt hunger, he would beg from nearby villages, and when his stomach was full, he would return to strike the cliff. If he felt the slightest hint of laziness, he would chant mantras to stir his courageous spirit. Day after day, his efforts continued without pause. Travelers who passed by each time would jeer and mock him, but Ikikuro's heart remained unyielding to their taunts. Hearing their laughter only strengthened his resolve. Eventually, Ikikuro built a small hut near the cliff to shield himself from the rain and dew. He would rise at dawn, as the flow of the Yamakuni River reflected the light of the stars, and he would not stop working until the sounds of the rapids resonated through the quiet world at dusk. However, the travelers still did not cease their mocking words. "What a fool who doesn't know his own limits," they said, ignoring Ikikuro's efforts. Yet, Ikikuro swung the hammer with single-minded determination. As long as he swung the hammer, no distracting thoughts arose in his mind. There was no remorse for having killed a person, nor any yearning to be reborn in paradise. All that existed was a clear and focused spirit of diligence. Since becoming a monk, he felt the memories of his past misdeeds gradually fading with each passing night. He increasingly stirred his courageous heart and dedicated himself to swinging the hammer with unwavering focus. The new year arrived. Spring came, then summer, and before long, a year had passed. Ikikuro's efforts were not in vain. At one end of the sheer cliff, a cave nearly 1 jo deep had been carved out. Though it was a small cave, Ikikuro's strong will was clearly manifested in that first mark. However, the nearby villagers once again laughed at Ikikuro. "Look at that. The mad monk has dug that much. After a whole year of struggle, he's only managed that little." They scoffed. Yet, when Ikikuro looked at the hole he had excavated, he felt tears of joy welling up. No matter how shallow it was undeniably a manifestation of his diligent effort. Ikikuro, as the years passed, grew even more invigorated. By night, in the darkness of the cave, and even by day, he sat in that dimly lit cave, swinging only his right arm with the fervor of madness. For Ikikuro, the act of swinging his right arm became his entire religious life. Outside the cave, the sun shone and the moon illuminated the sky, while rain fell and storms raged. Yet inside the cave, only the relentless sound of the hammer echoed. At the end of the second year, the villagers still did not cease their mocking. However, their laughter no longer escaped their lips. After seeing Ikikuro, they would merely exchange glances and laugh at each other. Yet another year passed. The sound of Ikikuro's hammer resonated continuously, just like the water of the Yamakuni River. The villagers no longer spoke of him. Their expressions of ridicule had gradually transformed into astonishment. Ikikuro's hair had grown long enough to cover his shoulders without being combed, and he looked unrecognizable due to the dirt that clung to him from not having bathed. Yet, inside the cave he had carved out, he continued to swing the hammer like a beast in a frenzy. The villagers' astonishment gradually turned into sympathy. When Ikikuro occasionally took a brief break to set out on his almsgiving pilgrimage, he often found a bowl of offerings unexpectedly left at the cave's entrance. Because of this, he was able to spend more time working on the cliff instead of on alms. The end of the fourth year had come. The cave that Ikikuro had excavated had now reached a depth of nearly 5 jo, about 15 feet. However, compared to the cliff that exceeded 3 cho, about 3.6 kilometers, there was still a sense of despair. Although the villagers were amazed by Ikikuro's dedication, not a single person helped him in this seemingly futile endeavor. Ikikuro had to continue his efforts alone. Yet, immersed in the work of digging, Ikikuro had no thoughts other than swinging the hammer. Like a mole, he had no other intention but to dig as long as he had life in him. He persevered alone and diligently continued to dig. Outside the cave, spring passed and autumn came. The seasons changed, but within the cave, only the sound of the hammer echoed incessantly. Poor monk. He seems to have gone mad, trying to dig through that great boulder. He'll end his life without even making a dent. The travelers began to pity Ikikuro's futile efforts. But as the years went by the end of the 9th year, he had excavated a total of 22 ken, about 40 meters, from the entrance of the hole. The villagers of Hitago were finally aware of the possibility of Ikikuro's endeavor. The thought that a single emaciated monk could dig this far over 9 years meant that if more people joined him over the years, it would not be impossible to pierce through this great cliff. 9 years ago, the villagers along the 7 districts beside the Yamakuni River had all rejected Ikikuro's appeal for help, but now they voluntarily began to contribute to the excavation. Several stonemasons were hired to assist Ikikuro's project. He was no longer alone. The sound of many hammers striking the rock began to resonate courageously and cheerfully from within the cave. However, the following year, when the villagers measured the progress of the construction and discovered that it had not yet reached a quarter of the cliff, they again expressed their disappointment and doubt. They won't achieve anything, even if they increase their numbers. They've been deceived by Ryokai into undertaking unnecessary work, they remarked, growing weary of the slow progress of the construction. Ikikuro found himself alone once more. He realized that the number of those wielding hammers by his side had decreased, one by one, until there was no one left. However, he never chased after those who left. Silently, he continued to swing his hammer alone. The villagers' attention had completely drifted away from Ikikuro. Especially as the cave was dug deeper, Ikikuro's figure, swinging his hammer in the depths, grew more distant from the eyes of the travelers. People would wonder, peering into the darkness of the cave, I wonder if Ryokai is still at it. However, such curiosity eventually faded away, and Ikikuro's existence would often slip from the villagers' minds. Just as Ikikuro was indifferent to the villagers, their presence was also indifferent to him. All that existed for him was the massive rock wall before him. Yet, Ikikuro had been sitting on the cold, dark stone in the cave for over 10 years, causing his face to turn pale, his eyes to sink, and his flesh to waste away until he hardly seemed alive. However, within Ikikuro's heart, the indomitable spirit of courage burned fiercely, leaving him with no thoughts other than to keep digging. With every inch or every fragment of the cliff that was chipped away, he would raise his voice in joy. Ikikuro remained alone and spent another 3 years. Then, the villagers' attention began to return to him once again. Out of sheer curiosity, they decided to measure the depth of the cave. They found that it was a total of 65 ken long, and on the wall facing the river, a window had been made for light. It became clear that at least 1/3 of this massive rock wall had been penetrated primarily by Ikikuro's thin arms. They opened their eyes in amazement once more. They felt shame for their past ignorance. Their respect for Ikikuro began to revive in their hearts. Soon, the sounds of the hammers of nearly 10 craftsmen who had come to contribute once again harmonized with Ikikuro's. Another year passed. As the year went by, the villagers began to regret the distant expenses they had once deemed unimportant. Before long, the number of laborers contributing to the work decreased, and eventually only the sound of Ikikuro's hammer echoed in the darkness of the cave. However, whether he was alone or surrounded by others, the force of Ikikuro's hammer remained unchanged. He lifted it with all his strength, bringing it down with equal force, as if he were a machine. He had forgotten even his own existence. The memories of killing his master, committing theft, and taking lives faded away, becoming a distant recollection. 1 year passed, then 2. Regardless of his single-minded focus, his emaciated arms showed no signs of yielding, and by the end of the 18th year, he realized that he had unknowingly carved out half of the rock face. When the villagers witnessed this terrifying miracle, they no longer doubted Ikikuro's work. They were filled with genuine remorse for their previous laziness and rallied together to support him. That year, the governor of Nakatsu-han visited and expressed his admiration for Ikikuro's efforts. Nearly 30 stonemasons were gathered from nearby areas. The construction progressed like a fire consuming dry leaves. People urged Ikikuro, whose frail form was a painful sight, saying, "You need no longer wield the hammer yourself, you should lead the stonemasons instead." Yet Ikikuro stubbornly refused to comply. It seemed he believed that if he were to fall, he would do so while still gripping his hammer. He continued to pour all his effort into the work, completely oblivious to the 30 stonemasons laboring beside him, just as he always had. It was not unreasonable for the villagers to urge Ikikuro to rest. After nearly 20 years of sitting in the deep shadows of a rock face without sunlight, his legs were in pain from prolonged sitting, and he had lost the ability to stretch freely. He needed a cane to support even his slightest movements. Moreover, it was likely that his long-term exposure to darkness without seeing sunlight had taken a toll. The constant shower of broken stones around him may have also injured his eyes. His vision had become hazy, losing the ability to discern colors and forms. Even Ikikuro, with his unwavering resolve, felt the encroaching frailty of age weighing on his heart. While he had no attachment to his life, he felt a deep regret at the thought of falling short of his goal. 2 more years of patience, he shouted inwardly, trying to forget his own aging as he swung the hammer with all his might. The rock wall that had stood before him, demonstrating the overwhelming majesty of nature, was gradually being pierced by the arms of a frail beggar monk. The cave, hollowed out in its middle, was like a living being, striving to penetrate its very core.